I'm Tammy Dennett, ex Target workplace bully turned communication coach. But it wasn't that long ago when I lacked the skills, the tools, and the knowledge to ditch the drama, confidently handle difficult conversations, and create better relationships. Fast forward past many failed attempts and lessons learned, and you will see the business that I have today. One that is helping others just like you to find the confidence and peace knowing you can change your circumstances one conversation at a time. I created the Dissolve Workplace Conflict Summit to give you access to industry leaders who are sharing simple, actionable, step by step strategies so you can do the same. If you are an employee, supervisor, or an employer and you are looking to access the top strategies to successfully dissolve conflict without damaging your relationships, then you, my friend, are in the right place. Today, I'd like to introduce you to Robin Hills. Robin Hills specializes in training, coaching, and personal development focused around emotional intelligence, positive psychology, and neuroscience. He is the author of two books, The Authority Guide to Emotional Resilience in Business and The Authority Guide to Behavior in Business. He has the most comprehensive range of courses based on emotional intelligence available online with over 250,000 learners accessing his courses in over 180 countries. That is so impressive, Robin. Today, we're going to be talking about how to explore empathy, and Robin will be sharing techniques to enhance and improve our ability to use empathy to build better relationships. Welcome, Robin.
Thank you ever so much, Tammy. I'm delighted to be here.
I'm delighted to be able to have this conversation. It's 5 o'clock for you in the evening, and it's 10 o'clock in the morning for me. And I think we're on the same day. I'm not even sure.
I think we are, yes. Sometime in March, I've lost count of the days because we're still in lockdown.
Yes, me, us as
Is,
well.
is it Tuesday? Is it Wednesday?
Yeah. I just love that we can connect across the pond, as they say, without
Yeah.
having to take a plane and hotel costs. This is fantastic.
Oh, no, it's brilliant, isn't it?
Yes. So, we're going to talk about empathy today. Such an important topic when it comes to relationships, whether it's at work or at home, and how to dissolve conflict before it really becomes something bigger.
Sure. I think if we can look at empathy as being a fundamental component of emotional and social intelligence. So, emotional intelligence is the way in which you utilize your thinking with your feelings in order to make better decisions and to build quality relationships. So, how does empathy fit into all that? Well, empathy is an awareness component. You need to be aware of other people in your environment, and you need to have an understanding of things from their perspective. You need to see things through their eyes. You need to feel things in ways that they feel. So, empathy is a fundamental component of being socially intelligent and being emotionally intelligent. It's the way that you engage with other people by having that understanding. Now, there are going to be many people that you meet on a day to day basis, particularly when we're allowed out again, who you don't necessarily like. And you don't necessarily like some of their thoughts and some of the ways in which they perceive the world and some of their thinking. That's not important. What is important is that you try and understand it from their perspective. You don't need to agree, you just need to understand it. And that is very hard because if there is somebody who we're engaging with and we don't like the way in which they're thinking, what do? We
We
try
tend to
and
not like
change.
anything they say.
Yeah, and we try and change their thought processes. Now, we can perhaps do that from time to time, but the most important thing to do is just to ask questions, find out more. You might be surprised. They might be right, you might be wrong. So the important thing is just to keep that open mind. However, you've got to be aware of your emotions because if somebody really is transgressing your core values and some of your core beliefs, and they're being quite insulting about it, you actually have to manage your emotions in order to deal with that.
Mhm.
And in those sort of situations, being empathetic is not easy. And I say this all along, emotional intelligence, social intelligence, they are very easy to understand, but they're very difficult to put into practice.
Well, and I think there was a key piece there is when you had said it's about being aware of your thinking and your feelings, the two together, but the awareness is sometimes really difficult to have at the forefront of your brain when you're all of a sudden blindsided with a conflict, you weren't expecting something to happen, you've just, casually started talking to somebody and it's been a trigger for them and now they are responding in an emotional way that you weren't expecting. And so
Mm.
being aware is really probably a fundamental piece to practice. Would that be a fair
Oh,
statement?
oh, yes, most certainly. And I think an important component within that, Tammy, is self-awareness. So you need to know your own hot buttons, you need to know your own triggers. And if somebody comes along and presses one, how do you respond?
Mm.
It's very, very easy. Again, it's very easy for me to say, but it's very difficult to stop yourself from reacting in an angry manner if somebody really has pressed your hot buttons. So, what are your hot buttons? Only you will know. And what presses your hot buttons is not necessarily going to press my hot buttons. So, with regards to hot buttons, it's having this awareness that you have the hot buttons and what it is that is going to set them off. Now, the people that are most likely to set your hot buttons off, particularly when you were growing up, are your brothers and your sisters. Mommy's doing that again.
Yeah, they are pretty good at that.
Oh, they're very good at it. As they become adults, they hopefully mature. But I know a lot of people don't mature in the way in which we would like them to. And, I've got a brother and sister, and from time to time, they still press those hot buttons.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. I mean, obviously, that's people that are most immediately accessible to you. Great growing, great growing grounds. I don't know if that's the right way to say it. A great opportunity to grow and to learn those things is being close to those people. We tend to take them for we tend to take advantage of them more by being just so free and vulnerable with them with our emotions and not really putting a limit as to how we express ourselves, meaning that we can go overboard sometimes.
Mm. And I think we tend to do that with our partners.
Hmm.
And our partners should provide us with a safe environment for us to explore that. Now, again, very easy to say, and I know some relationships don't allow that to happen.
Hmm.
And I know men find it very difficult to open up and share how they are feeling about certain situations. They tend to have a very easy default button to anger, fear, and that might just about be it. They might show some happiness from time to time. That's not emotional intelligence. That's just somebody being fairly belligerent. So you've actually got to know that there are blends of many hundreds, if not thousands, of emotions underneath some of the basic emotions that we all experience. And by having that self knowledge, helps us to understand other people having those emotions. So the more oh,
No,
sorry.
I was just gonna say we kind of like touched on those really intimate relationships, the family, the spouse, which are really great places to learn about what our hot buttons are and how to control them.
Mm,
I imagine in the workplace when you work with somebody so closely or for so long, it almost feels like a family relationship, and we may take advantage of that relationship as well.
oh, very much so. It's not. It doesn't have the same intimacy, but it has a lot of immediacy because you are with those individuals day in, day out, and you probably spend more time during the week with them than you do your family. And they are going to have an impact on you and your emotions. They're going to have an impact on your performance. And you may find that there are going to be certain times where you are in conflict situations with certain people in your team. They just don't do things that you like.
Mm.
And who's right and who's wrong in that situation? Well, to a certain extent, you're both right and you're both wrong. So it's where that middle ground is. And that's hard to explore when you're emotionally digging your heels in and saying, I'm right.
Hmm.
And you feel so intensely right that the other person is wrong. But they don't get up in the morning and think, who am I going to annoy today? I know, I'll go and annoy Robin. I think he's due for a bit of annoyance from me. They don't think that way. They're just behaving and acting in the way in which they think is most appropriate.
Hmm. And that's such a good point to make. I think we tend to forget that everyone is working out of a different lens and a different perspective and what they think is best going forward. And the intention of usually both parties is to get to the end game, but we just sometimes have different viewpoints on how that's going to be played out.
Mm. And that end game, we don't know what it looks like, but it might not look the way in which we envisage it. Does it matter?
Well, let's talk a little bit about how the brain works because I feel like there might
Yeah,
be some
sure.
things we can learn here that would help us with these relationships.
Sure. Well, we are born with the innate ability to develop empathy. We're not born with this ability to empathize. We actually learn empathy from our primary caregiver, which is usually our mother, or if we're unlucky, it is a primary caregiver, either in the family or outside of the family. But during the first few months of life, we learn empathetic responses by responding to her, if I can use the gender term, her emotions. Now, if there's a father in the relationship, he is secondary, but he's as important. And the child picks up the emotional cues from their mother and their father, and they learn to respond to those cues. And as we get older and become more emotionally developed, we learn them from our school teachers and our friends.
Mhm.
And these are ways in which we build up empathy. Now, if we were to think about it, where does empathy sit? Does it sit in my brain? Does it sit in your brain? When I'm empathizing with you. In actual fact, what happens is that during our conversations, our brains are changing. And through empathy, we are changing each other's brains through the conversations that we're having. And there are special neurons which allow that to happen, which I'll come back to in a minute. But the bizarre and interesting thing about all of this is that without each other, we're not able to create each other.
Mm.
And without these conversations, we're not wholesome beings.
Mhm.
So we do need the conversations, the relationships, the empathy in order to become whole human beings.
Mhm. That's such a fascinating point. I think of all I mean, there's research studies where I think there was a child who grew up without human interaction and they were around animals. And so they manifest animal behaviors, right?
Yeah.
And so, how do I know if I'm funny? I only know if I'm funny if somebody laughs. How do I know if I'm caring? I'm only know I'm caring because somebody responds in a warm way. So, that interaction is so important to define who we are.
Yes, yeah. And I mentioned these three neurons. There are three types of neurons in the brain. And this is very, very, very simplistic. But I think it's important in terms of understanding the neuroscience. So we've identified at the moment three. There may be more. And the first one is mirror neurons. So if you bang your hand with a hammer, it will hurt. And empathetically, I may not have banged my hand with a hammer, but through empathy, my mirror neurons will tell me, ouch, that hurt. And I may feel some semblance of pain within that. The other class of neurons are oscillator neurons, and these are neurons where my neurons are oscillating with your neurons. And between us, we're building up that empathetic relationship, we're building up that rapport. And if I can become metaphysical, they are trying to oscillate at the same energy.
Mhm.
So again, between us, we're building up that connection in the most appropriate way by the way in which our brain cells are oscillating. And the third component are spindle neurons. And these are the neurons that give us the ability to intuitively understand each other and to pick up on some of the cues, some of the subtle non-said cues that help us to determine what it is that we need to do to become more empathetic.
That's interesting. I'm wondering, when it comes to people who are more apt to show empathy versus those who maybe go into sympathy, which is extremely different. Is there a difference in, I don't know if you have studies on this, it's just a question I'm thinking of. Has the science shown that one person tends to have more of these neurons active versus the other, or is it just a matter of being taught?
That's a really good question, and I don't know the answer to that. And it might be because I haven't read the right research. So it would be useful for me to go away and just to explore that further. I just don't know. The difference between somebody who's empathetic and somebody who's sympathetic is that somebody who's empathetic is treating the individual that they're interacting with as an equal, and they are trying to understand it from the other person's perspective. Whereas somebody who's sympathetic takes a position of superiority, and they are feeling sorry for the other person, and they're trying to do things more to assuage their own emotions rather than helping the other person to come to terms with their situation.
Mhm.
Now, it may be that somebody intuitively knows what the other person wants and can give it through sympathy. But
Mhm.
I think in terms of empathy, the important thing is to ask.
That is a very interesting perspective that I hadn't considered before, is that somebody may in fact be looking for sympathy. And I've always been focused on the difference between the two, how to be empathic versus sympathetic. But you're right, there are people, and we know them, who that's all that they want from you is sympathy, to say, oh, that's
Yeah.
really bad. Yes, I under, maybe not yes, I understand, because that's the empathy part. They kind of go hand in hand, don't they?
Well, the critical question is, how can I help? Not, do you want me to be sympathetic?
Yeah.
Because it's not a very nice question. And you've got to then use your intuition through the answer that they give you to determine which pathway you go down.
Hmm.
And, let's face it, you're going to get it wrong sometimes. I get it wrong
Hmm.
sometimes.
Yeah,
But
that's,
the important thing is to ask.
and I think that is an important question. It's like setting boundaries up before the conversation starts so that you know how to be successful within that relationship.
Yes. Yeah. The key skill here, the key empathetic skill is a coaching skill. It's being able to ask the right questions in the right way, and they've got to be of sufficient quality. And
Mhm.
that's not an easy skill to master.
No, but what's important in that statement is that it's teachable. It's
It
coachable.
is.
It's something that you can learn. So for those who are maybe feeling, who are listening or thinking, oh, I can't do that. Like I've just never been able to connect that way, but you can. It's a mindset shift and taking some training.
It is, and if I can give you a very simple tip, which you will know, Tammy, but for anybody else out there, start your sentences with a who, what, why, when, where, or how. And if you start your question with one of those words, it will, strangely enough, be a lovely open question
Hmm.
that is a coaching question. Try your best not to start a question with, do, because do leads to a closed question, which gives a yes or no answer, a black and white answer, a positive, negative answer, or a number. So, that's just one simple tip. So how can I help? What is it that you would like me to do today? Where are we going to go with this conversation? Who else should we involve in all of this? Um, what else can I do to help and support you? All of these are very good open questions. The reason why people don't ask them more often than not is they feel that they're going to lose control of the conversation.
Mhm. Well, and I think our default is the why question.
Yes, and
I
you've got to be
challenge my
very careful. Sorry.
Yes. No, I was just gonna say I challenge my students all the time to not use the why for like
Yeah.
24 hours. Every time you hear it come out of your mouth, stop and replace it with a who, what, where, when, how kind of question.
Because why is very aggressive. It's accusatory, and you've just got to be very, very careful that you're not accusing somebody
Mhm.
by asking a question. Why did you do that? Well, you can use it, but you have to be very aware of the impact that it might have if you don't temper it a little bit. This is really interesting. I'd like to know why you thought that that was a good idea. Help me to understand that.
Yeah, that's a great qualifying on the end of that question.
Yeah.
Help me understand. I love that one too. It's like we're talking the same language here. That's awesome. Now, when it comes to using empathy to build better relationships, I think you've already just given us an amazing tip there on how to start a conversation because it intuitively will create a space for the other person to clarify and to add more information so that you can get a broader picture.
Yes, and I think the other key component within that is listening. And a lot of people will talk about listening, and what they consider listening to be is hearing the other person's words. And that is not listening, that is hearing.
I often do that
So,
with my husband. I'll say something, he'll walk away. I'm like, you didn't listen to me. He goes, yes, I did. And he will say everything I said back to me, which is annoying.
yes, very annoying, but did he understand it?
Yeah, that's the part I was making. That's the point I'm making.
Yeah. Now, I would not recommend this to anybody. And it just happens to be the circumstance and the situation that I find myself in. I'm actually mildly to moderately deaf. I wear hearing aids normally. And this is the reason why I got my headset on, because I can hear you loud and clear in my head. And I've kind of modified them for and adjusted them for my hearing loss. But the beauty of that is that I've actually had to learn to be a lot more empathetic. And it seems that I lost my hearing in my mid-20s, which was decades ago. And I didn't know. And a lot of people are saying to me, "Oh, you're very good at listening, Robin." Well, I've actually had to use compensating techniques. So I can't lip read, but I look at the eyes a lot, and I look what's behind the eyes, and I listen very intently to the words to make sure I've really understood.
Mm.
So um, it's one of these techniques which I've had to learn, and what it means is that if somebody says something to me and I haven't heard it, the tip I can give you is not to say, um, you're not making sense, or um, speak in a different way, or whatever. It's a case of actually saying, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Can you repeat it, please? And you would be very surprised how people just respond to it. And they respond a lot more positively
Hmm.
than you would imagine. But a lot of people feel rather intimidated about saying that, because the person may turn around and say something quite rude and abrupt, like, "Are you deaf?" Well, the answer that I can give them is, "Yes, I am. So can you repeat it, please?"
Ah, I do think when you ask that question, it does decrease the intensity. If somebody had initially said something with a little bit of heat and you come with them and say, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Can you say that again? I guess there's a risk for it to escalate, but I find in my experience that it's given them a moment to already think and a pause. Okay, did you? And it usually brings them down. I don't know if you have found the same.
Oh, I very much so, and that really is a brilliant tip that you're giving people. If there is an intense moment emotionally, if somebody is shouting or they're speaking very, very loudly, by actually then saying to them, "I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you were saying," um, actually phases them a little bit. It gets them to stop. It gets them to check what it is that they're saying. And if they do tone it down a little bit, they may rephrase it in the process.
Mm-hmm.
And then what you can do is to repeat back what you've heard just to make sure you've understood. And again, that gives a little bit of breathing space. Now, it's very important to say that you and I can talk about this very easily, but in the heat of the moment, it's very hard to remember how to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, what was that tip that Tabby and Robin came up with? Oh, it's a bit late.
Well, that maybe links us right back to the very beginning when we talked about building that awareness. And one of the thoughts I had at that time was I believe there was a gentleman, and I wish I could remember details of studies, it's just not my strength. But I think what he did is he went out every day and tried to find discomforting conversations to learn about his response so that he could become a better person. And not that I'm saying go out and find discomforting conversations, but starting to have an awareness of just those quick tips, like even just knowing I can just say to somebody, I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Can you say it again? You can just have that as your catchphrase for every
Yeah.
time you feel like you're having an emotional trigger to buy yourself time to get back out of your emotional brain and into your thinking brain because we kind of get hijacked for a moment when we get
Oh, yes.
startled.
Yes, most definitely. And I think when we start looking at one of the business techniques that is increasingly coming into favor, that of mindfulness, then what you have just suggested is a part of that and a part of awareness. And it's given the word rumination, which for me is what cows do when they're chewing the cud. But when we're looking at rumination, you actually are chewing the cud. You're going over a conversation that you've had and you're looking at what you could do better. So it's highlighting to yourself what went wrong and what it is that you did as
Mhm,
or what is it that I did as an individual to ensure that the conversation didn't go as well as it could have done, and how can I make sure that that doesn't happen again?
mhm.
And again, it's important not to berate yourself. Oh, woe is me, I'll never get this right, because I've been practicing this for years. You've been practicing it for years, and I still get it wrong.
Yes, me too.
But that's
There's
what makes us human.
there's just so many unique ability factors among conversations. We don't know when we got on this phone call today, I had no idea what your day was like, who you just
Yeah.
talked with, what kind of energy you were just left out of. In fact, the other day I had an interview and the phone call I had before had left a real negative energy. And I was like, I need to dance and get this off me before I come onto the phone. Right. So you don't know what people are bringing into that moment.
No,
And we have
that's
our
right.
blinders on as to what we're expecting, what we're hoping for, what we're trying to accomplish. And that's where those questions of who, what, where, when, how, just when you don't get the reaction you anticipated, take a step back and go, okay, something is in the field here. Speaking of cows, something is in the field that I'm missing. And what do I need to gather?
Yes. Yeah, and the best way to do it, and again, it seems counterintuitive, but it's what we've been talking about all along. You just ask another open question.
Mhm. That's beautiful. I think that is a wonderful conversation around empathy and what it is, what it looks like, what it feels like. I mean, I think if you've ever been on the receiving end of empathy, you know how differently that feels compared to sympathy. And you also know how that empathy will open you up and feel safe. It builds a trust immediately when you show you have an interest in learning more.
Yes, most definitely. And the person that I learn more from is my eldest daughter, who is trained as a counselor, and she has an ability just to be there and to ask these questions and to empathize. Now, she didn't get that. Well, she may have got it from me somewhere along the line. I mean, the genes are in there,
Yeah.
but she's learned this, and it's absolutely wonderful to go along and have a conversation with her when I'm feeling that I need some empathy.
It sounds like she's had a really great teacher, and I'm sure you've had a little bit of an influence in there.
Well, I like to think so, but I think she has learnt a lot of it herself, and
Mhm.
I want to give her all the credit for the skills that she's got and not to take anything away from her.
And that's I keep saying that's important. I think recognizing that when you give someone tools that they have to integrate it. They have to actually consciously choose to make this their pathway as well. So,
Yeah,
well
yeah,
done.
that's definitely it.
hmm and I know that my son is the same. How old is your daughter, your oldest?
Oh, this is going to age me, isn't it?
Uh-oh. You don't have to
No,
say.
no, she's in her early 30s.
Okay,
She's
yeah.
in
See,
her
my son's
30s.
in his early 20s. Actually, he's
Yeah.
just 20. The other one's 24. And same thing, when they were in the teens, they didn't get it. They didn't appreciate it. Teenagers don't want to have conversations about
Mm.
feelings and all that kind of stuff. But now he comes to me all the time and he's like, Mom, this stuff is really good. Like, it really helps me. And I'm like, he had to make that choice, right? And integrate it. He's been actually one of my biggest teachers as well, helping me be a better parent by being present and having conversations with me when things aren't, when it feels ugly and I don't feel like I'm living into my values and what I want to be. I feel like our kids are sometimes our best teachers.
Yes, yes, and through them, as adults, we can learn empathy.
Yes, absolutely. So, speaking of empathy, you have a resource that you're going to offer to the attendees, and it says online course Understanding Empathy. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that course?
Yes, I found in all the times that I've been working in emotional intelligence, there's very little in terms of how do you train people to be empathetic. Well, to a certain extent, you can't. It's all about awareness. So I put together a particular course, Understanding Empathy, really just to give people some hints and tips, some insights, and to help them to learn about being more empathetic. The online course, you get lifetime access to the course, and there are a range of videos. There's some quizzes and some activities for you to work with away from the course. And just feel free to sign up, make the most of it, and enjoy it. It usually retails around I'm not too sure, is it $99 or $149? But what I'm doing is making it completely free to anybody who's got the link that you're going to share. And indeed, I'm going to share with people.
That's amazing. And we will put the link below this so people can access that without having to search for it. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Robin, for joining us today and for sharing your zone of genius around empathy and how the brain works and how we can tap into those pieces to make it work for us.
No, that's brilliant. Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Tammy.
Awesome. And that's an official wrap on this session of the Dissolve Workplace Conflict Summit Speaker Series. Now be sure to connect with your favorite speakers by clicking on the link below and taking advantage of the free resources that they are sharing with you so that you can dissolve your conflict without damaging your relationships. Now be sure to head on over into the Facebook group Dissolving Workplace Conflict and give us your favorite takeaways from today's session using the hashtag Dissolve Workplace Conflict. I can't wait to see what you've learned.